Coming up on Sunday Nation, the man who has been assigned to be the caretaker of the Detroit Public Schools Community District, Dr. Nikolai Vitti, is here to talk to us about the state of the district from COVID-19 to where we are. We also have Dr. Chad Audi. Some numbers on the state of homelessness in Detroit that you need to know about. All coming up right after this break on Sunday Nation. Stay with us. All right, welcome back to Sunday Nation here. I'm Bankole Thompson. Dr. Nikolai Vitti is the superintendent of the Detroit Public Schools Community District. There is so much to talk about this afternoon. Thank you so much for being here.
Always good to be with you. Thank you.
Go back to COVID-19 in terms of its adverse impact on the district. Some may have a different view, said, well, COVID has really submerged urban communities. But given where the Detroit Public Schools is right now, how do you think that COVID has impacted the operations of the district, as well as, you know, the free flow of its educational process?
Well, there's no doubt that the pandemic set us back when you think about enrollment, attendance, and student achievement. But considering the challenge of the pandemic, and even looking at other large urban school districts in the country or the state as a whole, I thought we did everything we could to meet families, employees, and students where they were at, to keep the district in survival mode, but also try to get ahead. And so statistically, when you look at, for again, learning loss and literacy and math, from 18-19, the last time students tested before the pandemic, to testing right out of the pandemic last year, we showed less learning loss than the state of Michigan, and less learning loss than charter schools in the city. So we showed loss, but not as much loss as the state average and in city charter schools. So with this year being a more normal year, not managing COVID as much as we have in the past, our enrollment is up versus the spring and the last two falls. A daily attendance has improved and chronic absenteeism is down. So I think this year is going to be a more normal year, and we can get back to the student achievement that we saw before 18-19. But there was a step back. You can't talk about the disproportionate impact COVID had on the Detroit community, the difficulties of online learning, the digital divide, all of that, quarantining for unvaccinated students, all of that led to disruption. So I'm not trying to paint a perfect picture. I'm just saying that with the challenges that existed, I think the district stepped up to meet those challenges the best we could, and we're now in a better position than some other districts to rebound from the pandemic.
Yeah, well, I want to get into the anatomy of the district where it is today, but just back a little bit on still on COVID though, do you feel that COVID has redefined public education in America?
I think COVID shed a light on how important the school system is.
Right.
We fed almost 2 million families during the pandemic. We already know the food security issues of the city, but when everyone was at home and afraid to work, our cafeteria workers went to work and they fed families through grab and go, giving out packets for students to work on hard copy, raising money through the business community to give laptops out and internet access. And then just knowing when children were at home and they had to learn online, just the burden that it placed on families to support children at home, I do think people had a greater appreciation of what teachers do in the classroom because of the challenges online. And I think that happened not only in Detroit, but even in the suburbs. A better understanding of what really happens in schools and in classrooms. I think that's how it redefined and a greater appreciation for public education.
So let's look into your crystal ball. If you knew ahead of time that COVID was going to hit, let's say 2 years away, before it became, are there things that you would do differently at the district?
The only thing I would have done differently, and we were working on, so I wouldn't say differently.
Right.
One thing that we were working on is trying to move the curriculum online.
Okay.
And we were moving in that direction, but the pandemic created a greater sense of urgency, and it provided us more resources to do that. If I knew the pandemic was coming, the curriculum would have been shifted online faster. The other thing, if I knew it was coming, I would have ensured that every student had a device, a laptop. Now, students had access to a laptop in the school, but they weren't carrying it with them day to day.
Right.
Those are the two big things that I would have done, not differently, but it had a crystal ball, that's what I would have done differently.
So you think COVID made the digital divide more pronounced?
Definitely, yeah. And the pandemic and the resources that came with the pandemic narrowed the digital divide. It's not completely narrowed, but it narrowed it from access to device and even access to internet.
Right. But I'm wondering though, when you look at the district surviving COVID and coming out of this, is there a test case here though, a model? About best practice in terms of how the district has been able to emerge out of this?
Well, I would say without a doubt, feeding people. I mean, I don't, that's not something that you typically think about the district doing. Right. But so many of our
But it's not something
children,
that we hear a lot of superintendents talk about, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, so many of our children rely on the public school system to eat breakfast and to eat lunch and even some of our programs and dinner. So, you know, that I think became clear, and even feeding the greater community. Now moving into vaccinating, I'm not just talking about COVID vaccine, but all the immunization. So I've been pushing for years for the Michigan Health Department to give us access to the vaccines or allow us to immunize our students, because there's just too many.
Do you have access to that?
We have access now.
Okay.
And so even this year, we've in this beginning of the school year, we vaccinated or immunized hundreds of students, which, you know, that's part of the requirement to go to school, and a lot of our students have always been behind on that. Right. So that's definitely a lesson learned and an awakening that we have better access to children and families, and they trust us more than some of the other government organizations. And so what we've been advocating for, what I've been advocating for, is health hubs in schools so that families can get better access to medical, dental, even mental health. And I think that's another thing that we've been able to expand, just trauma-informed care. With COVID relief funding that we receive from the federal government, now every school can offer one-on-one small group therapy to address some of the trauma that we know our families face and our children face.
So I want to let's look at the anatomy of the district now from within. You've lost some students during COVID. How are you recouping from that?
So the peak of our enrollment, so DPSCD hadn't seen an increase in enrollment for 2 decades. So the year before the pandemic hit, we had reached our peak at about 51,000 students, an increase of almost 7,000 students, most in 2 decades. In 2 decades, not even an increase. It was always a decline. And so when you compare that number to where we are today, it's about 1,500 students less. Last year it was 3,000. So we've cut it in half, but it's still about 1,500. Now our budget has not felt that because of COVID relief funding.
Right.
At the end of this year, going into next year without COVID relief funding, we're going to have to structure the budget differently because we've lost 1,500. Now per pupil increases helped mitigate that, but coupled with that now is inflation. So the cost of everything is going up, and we're going to have to continue to increase teacher salaries if we're going to be competitive and keep those teachers. So going into next year, we're going to have to restructure the budget in order to keep up with inflation, the enrollment loss, and dealing with necessary salary increases to protect our teachers.
I want to talk about facilities, but let's stay with the teachers for a minute here, because you know, the Detroit Public Schools District is no stranger to, you know, incessant protests and demonstrations that teachers have held over the years. We've not seen much of that during your tenure here. Talk about the relationship between you and the DFT, Federation of Teachers.
Well, you know, I've always said it.
Before your arrival, I mean, I've covered the district. It used to be almost a daily bread.
Yeah, well, I think teachers know. When I talk, it's one thing to say things, but I think I've backed up what I've said through our budgets and our funding. Teacher salaries have increased by 15,000 since I became superintendent.
15,000?
15,000 on average. So the most veteran teachers were at about 68,000 when I started. They're now at 82,000. Beginning teachers were at about 38,000. Now they're at 51,000. And that doesn't even account one-time bonuses that we've had, because I've said it, the most important employee in a school district are teachers. The epicenter of reform and the magic of what happens in education happens in the classroom. And you have to have talented, committed, caring teachers to work with students. If that doesn't happen, everything else you're doing as a district doesn't matter. And I've said that the work in Detroit is the hardest work, I think, in public education in the country because of the history of race and the concentration of poverty. So that means the work is hardest. So if you're going to recruit and retain the best, you have to pay them. And we've done that. Now, the union and I don't always agree. But
yeah.
I think what we've learned and what we've done through trust and relationship is to say, if you disagree with me, tell me that. And if I disagree with you, I'll tell you that. But we can work that out behind closed doors on the phone. Mm-hmm. We don't need to yell and shout at each other in public or use the media to attack one another. And I think, at the end of the day, the teacher knows in our district that I care, the district cares, and we're putting money where our mouth is, and just environmental classroom conditions have improved.
So on the teacher issue, though, I want to stay with this because this always comes up. It's almost not the holy grail of the public education debate, but just the demarcation between certified and uncertified teachers. How is that playing out in the district?
Well, right now we only have, walking in this meeting, 25 teacher vacancies.
Okay.
Only 25. And when I started, we had anywhere from 500 to 400. And our teachers are certified. They're either certified or they're in a certification program to be certified. And so not only have we recruited more students or teachers from the city charter schools, we've also recruited them from Metro Detroit, but we're building our own teachers. So we have paraprofessionals, we have academic interventionists, 80% of them graduated from DPS, 80% that are future teachers of color who we're working with them in the classroom, certification, and hands-on experience to become certified teachers in the district. That's our On the Rise Academy. So we're developing our own talent and not relying on the universities alone to create teachers.
So does this counter the so-called brain drain here that we've come to know, the exodus of teachers leaving the district in search of quote-unquote greener pastures in other districts outside of the parameters of Detroit?
Certainly there are individual teachers that have left, but at scale, the numbers show that they're actually coming to the school system now and staying, unless they're retiring.
Okay.
And almost about 3/4 of our teachers can retire in the next 5 years. But that's why we developed the On the Rise Academy to develop our own talent. And we have 2 schools that have teacher academies. So we're working with high school students to become future teachers. So they'll grade papers with teachers. They're shadowing teachers, talking to teachers, and we're hoping that those students may become paraprofessionals after they graduate from high school. So they go to college, but then they can be employed by the district. So we're building our own.
Interesting. Dr. Nikolai Vitti here, General Superintendent of the Detroit Public Schools Community District. We'll be right back with more on this interview. Stay with us. This is Sunday Nation and Bankole Thompson.